between the ward offices, and they're very supportive of this project as well. I know that I've also already heard some input. I think the neighborhood group has weighed in on some planters on 24th. I mean, on some, they aren't planters yet, but they're traffic calming circles there that will be in the street, interested in having them as planters. I know there's people who are talking about stop signs and more things we can do to strengthen this. And so I know the partnership is going to be continuing on into the future too as we finish this. So thanks everybody for being here and congratulations. Hopefully this will inspire all you youngsters to see that getting involved in government can make a difference, because I think it really did here. You really make a big impression on policymakers and elected officials when you come with clear ideas about things that you care about. So thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other comments? Well, I think Commissioner Gordon really summed up a very thorough process that got us to this point, and even more work to be done. If this isn't community-driven design, I don't know what is. And not only the activism that we see here today is not only impressive and commendable, it made a difference. I don't think we've had more attention put to an intersection than this one. So, so good job on making that happen. With that, I believe this is a discussion item, and we receive and file. So on the motion to receive and file, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Dissenting nay. That carries. Well, all right. So now we come to our last discussion item and the last item on the agenda, which is the 20-year streets funding plan, and it's an update on what we're doing and thinking.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Kathleen Mayell, a manager in our Transportation Planning and Program Division, is going to give you some information about the 20-year streets funding plan. This is a summary report of our efforts over this last year to develop process and recommendations as a result of the new streets funding adopted roughly nine months ago.
Morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Kathleen Mayell. I'm a supervisor, transportation planner in the Public Works Transportation Planning and Programming Division. And I'm happy to be here to report back on the plan document and our plan for the 20-year streets funding plan. So I will briefly review the process which has gotten us to where we are today, go over the plan structure, talk about a few additional outreach, or our plan for additional outreach moving forward, and then which leads into our next steps. So you've seen this graphic before. This explains since last April, when the council passed the 20-year street funding infrastructure ordinance, we worked throughout the summer, had different conversations around equity, how we build equity into our project selection process, looked at a lot of data, did some process improvements internally, and then came to you all in the fall with draft process and criteria, and in October went before Ways and Means for the budget presentation to adopt an amended CIP based on this street infrastructure ordinance. And as we mentioned then, that was just the beginning. That was a big first effort and work, but we are looking to continually adjust and refine this process as we move forward. And so part of what I'm going to share with you today is the first steps of that as we move forward. Again, we looked overall as we were developing this to have a data-driven process to prioritize and select those projects in our CIP that are street projects. And we really looked to use opportunities, looked for opportunities for all residents of Minneapolis to improve the street network throughout as we went through and selected and identified projects based on the criteria and methodology we developed over the summer. There's a number of project goals listed here, and again, you've seen these before, and really focusing here that we have a robust and data-driven criteria process, that we focus on racial and economic equity, that our street condition is maintained throughout the city, and that we look for, as we build upon the process that we took this first summer as we move forward with each subsequent CIP, as we hear more from the community, as we hear more if there are things that we can do to improve this selection process moving forward. And then again, we'll report on what we're doing with this funding and how we're making efforts to address the equity component as well. So where we ended up with was a quantitative process looking at asset condition and equity criteria, developing a list of potential projects, putting them through a qualitative screening, and getting to our CIP. Just about over half of our criteria is on asset condition, and then the other half is on equity criteria. All of this is what you'll find in our 20-year streets funding plan document. So we detail out the different amount of points given to each of these criteria and so on in this document. And that's what we're sharing with you all today. Again, here, just as a reminder, the qualitative screening, really looking to capitalize on making the most of what we have in front of in terms of combining like projects, doing the right fix at the right time, making sure we're collaborating with other agencies, and advancing other known city priorities and goals. So this plan, finishing it represents a major milestone in this effort. And there's quite a bit of information that we're excited to share with the public in here, as well as partner agencies and folks who are looking to the work that we did to help advance their own way of looking at equity and how do you create methodology that helps define that. So we've got a project website on the Public Works webpage under our Capital Improvement Program website, where we've got the plan, a link to the plan there. We also have the relevant presentations from this fall and the ordinance. So really a spot where people can go to get as much detail as they'd like, hopefully, about this process. Now just a little bit about the actual plan. These are the sections within the plan. We've got an executive summary and background, just explaining the process and how this plan came to be. There's a piece on policies and priorities. So this frames some of the, it helps set the policy framework for how some of these criteria and methodology were established, things like the complete streets policy and how that may influence the point allocation throughout the criteria and so forth, as well as priorities outlined in Access Minneapolis. Then we go into a bit of an investment framework. So this gives some background on typical types of fixes and how we decide what type of project advances when. So we really use this as an opportunity to help also be more transparent in how projects are selected. It's a great, we heard a lot of interest when we had conversations this past summer on how does this process work? What are you considering? And so hopefully this plan document helps explain a lot of those questions in more detail and provides fresh light on some of that information. The next section talks about the capital project prioritization, and this is where there are the details on the data sources, the amount of point given to each criteria, and it kind of frames that piece all up. The next section, results, shows some of the big picture results of the amended CIP this first go around. So that details out some of the metrics like the miles of reconstruction, the increase in the amount of improvements in the pedestrian realm, as well as protected bicycle facilities. It also gives a number of examples as to how a particular project would go through each bit of criteria and how it would score to give an understanding of how this all comes together on a project level. And then the last bit, only the beginning, is again, documents our intent to keep this process alive and moving forward throughout the years as we learn more and have better data sets and are able to collect more information and reflect also what we're hearing from the community. There are 4 appendices in the document as well. And the first one shows an analysis we did looking at different things we could measure that helped frame up some of our initial discussion, looking at things like where do we have sidewalk gaps throughout the city relative to where we have areas of concentrated poverty, which is just one way to look at equity, but it's looking at the data that we had available. So there's a whole series of maps kind of outlining different infrastructure in relationship to those areas. There's the second appendix is the full report back on all the different engagement we did. So the verbatim comments, there's a lot of interesting comments that people had. So I encourage anyone who's interested to take a look in there. Then there is the third appendix, which is the maps that detail out how each criteria scores throughout the city. So for example, what's the pavement condition throughout the city? That's one. Another one, where are modal needs throughout the city? How did that criteria play out across the city? And then finally, the last appendix is our amended CIP maps for 2017 to 2022. That also entails a list of projects by year and by type to help identify what projects are shown in those maps. So the criteria you see in this document was used for the 2017 to 2022 CIP. It's also being used to develop our 2018 to 2022 CIP, which was really identified through that process last summer. And then we will update that for the next iteration of the CIP. So when we're developing the 2019 to 2023 CIP, and things that will be updated would be process improvements that our project team has noted since we've developed this potentially, as well as things that we may hear from our ongoing outreach as to ways we could improve the criteria and methodology. So I wanted to give a few examples of what I mean by process improvements that the project team has noted. So there are things like, maybe we've heard, and maybe we should be increasing the points for pedestrian facilities in one of the criteria. We should have more clarity around when we talk about modal needs, what does it mean when a bicycle facility is already on a street versus when it's planned? And how do we differentiate between that? So these are pretty fine-grained things, but I just wanted to give a flavor of the types of things that I'm talking about in terms of process improvements for the methodology. Another one is looking to differentiate our total users and give a little bit more weighting or a different scale for the high pedestrian, bicycle, and transit volume streets versus just total users on a street system. Not differentiating between public and private utilities, because if it's a utility need, regardless, it's relatively the same level of importance. And then we've also heard about potentially it might make sense to stratify the points for non-white majority as well as low-income populations, as opposed to kind of a yes or no type of point structure, all or nothing. So we've got a few opportunities for continued engagement lined up, and we're open to other ideas as well. Since I've made this presentation, we have confirmed we will be having a presence at the Community Connections Conference in April and getting some feedback at that. We are planning on using our Open Streets events as a platform to gather some feedback. This idea comes also to the sentiment that we should be going more out into the community and engaging people where they are more. So this is a great way to reach potentially hundreds, if not thousands of people that will hopefully have something interesting that'll catch people's attention, draw them in for a couple minutes and get some quick feedback on what they think about in terms of these themes of equity and transportation and what it means to be meeting those goals. We've got, again, our website where right now we've just got an email address for thoughts or improvements, but looking to develop a little bit more of a robust interaction there. And then again, we're trying to connect back with some folks we talked to last summer in terms of their thoughts on equity and see what sort of other ideas they have. So we'll be making contact again with that kind of informal working group to let them direct them to the plan, continue the conversation about ways that we can continue to get more feedback and thoughts. And then just as the ideas percolate moving forward, we'll continue to incorporate as reasonable. And so again, that's kind of our short-term plan, is to continue this conversation and then reflect those changes or some changes in our next go around of the capital improvement program moving forward. That ends my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for the presentation? Councilmember Gordon.
Well, I don't really have any questions. I just can't control my enthusiasm. I think you should be so proud of what you're doing and what you're doing here. As I was sitting here listening, I was thinking about 5 or 6 years back when we were talking about we need to start using some kind of equity lens. We have to have a framework. Let's develop a toolkit, and struggling to understand really what that is. And I'm not sure that this is perfect or anything, but the amount of work that has gone into figuring it out and developing these details and being so transparent and public about it and actually saying we're gonna filter it through an equity lens to make our decisions and that we're trying it. I think within the city infrastructure here, you're probably pioneering this at a more deep level than we have with other budget considerations and other things we've done. And it wouldn't surprise me if you weren't pioneers in the nation and kind of in how we're trying to do this. I think having the funding was a real opportunity for us. The times we're living in, said this is the only way we can do it. But nevertheless, let's just acknowledge that this is a fantastic, and we're moving forward. And I think this is a great plan, and I really like the way we're going to keep evaluating it. We're going to get more input. We're going to see how it actually works and rolls out. But now people can see how we're basing our decisions and on what, and we can hear the problems they have with that or what they think about it, and we can keep fixing it. But just thank you so much, and you should be proud. And I feel kind of proud to be part of the city because we're doing this kind of thing. So thank you.
Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a very similar reaction to the presentation and also wanted to thank staff for all of the very quick and thorough work that went into this. I think it's just really exemplary. And I just wanted to note that this is being done on top of all of the other work that has been coming through, including implemented our protected bikeway system and responding to, many kinds of comments and questions from constituents and just sort of all the work that normally happens within the department. I really also appreciated the attention to continuing to improve the methodology based on feedback and experience. And I mean, we have 20 years here of a commitment to this, and I think that will continue to be really important. Again, with the sort of quick turnaround on some of the projects, I already noted when we had a public open house last week on the Hennepin Avenue reconstruction, a really huge shift in the way the department has approached communicating with constituents and community members about these projects. We had our Nathan's very well designed Mr. Coster's clip art version of our of our pyramid, but we had our complete streets policy front and center in the meeting. It was very cool, and it was very evident that policy was coming through in the presentation. And so that's just one place where I noted that. On the equity piece, I also echoed Councilmember Gordon's comment and appreciated, again, the sort of redefinition of that, and wanted to note that I hope, as I'm sure is planned as we go forward, we're really engaging with community leaders in communities of color and in our lower income neighborhoods to just understand how our scoring system can reflect, the day-to-day life of folks and their experience of our infrastructure. And then finally, wanted to say that one other thing I'm excited about, which is a kind of a big undertaking, I think, but I think we're doing a better and better job on our arterials and our big reconstruction projects of integrating bicycle and pedestrian safety into projects. But I want to note that I think the number one constituent contact in my office is about traffic safety on local residential streets. And the department has been extremely responsive in trying to work with my staff and community on these one-off improvements or plugs. But I've long hoped that we could take a more comprehensive approach to that as well in neighborhoods. And that's a big undertaking in addition to all these other things that are happening. But, some of the acceleration is leading to repavements on a lot of the neighborhood streets. And when I look at those big chunks of neighborhoods where I know I get complaint after complaint after complaint about sight lines or traffic speeds, it makes me think again that, instead again of kind of responding one-off by intersection, that if there's ways that we can rely on your expertise to make recommendations about how we can use those opportunities to implement traffic safety in neighborhoods. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Council Vice President Glidden.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Well, my comments are kind of general too. I will say a number of years ago, I remember having some conversations with staff in Public Works and this was kind of earlier when we were talking about race equity and how that might impact the city's work. And I think Public Works at that time was just trying to imagine, what is our role in this work? What does it look like? What does it feel like? And it's interesting for me to kind of see, I really think of Public Works now as one of our star leaders in piloting new ways to look at work and be able to share that, frankly, with other communities. I think it's also a good example of how a data-driven department can start to understand there's how you select what data, how you weight that data, all those different things can produce different results, and we can still be a data-driven organization. So I thought that was also just interesting, and this is not the first program, although I think it's the most influential program that's using this very specific criteria. We have a street lighting program that the department also utilized some different criteria, specifically referring to a race equity analysis. So you've been trying to think of how this fits into your work in multiple ways. I sit at several different tables where I interact with elected officials from other cities and counties, and I'll just tell you, folks from other jurisdictions are extremely interested in the work that you are doing. You are on the cutting edge, and your colleagues want to learn from you. So I just will say thank you, and I know that it's a lot of learning, and it's going to be a continuous process of learning. So I expect this and kind of all the things about how you're doing the work to continue to evolve, and that this is not the end of the story. This is the beginning of the story, but thank you for the work.
Thank you. Councilmember Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With regards to the engagement piece, I just wanted to throw this out there that I certainly hope we'll learn from the engagement work that has been done on the North Side Greenway and just the mistakes and mishaps and all these other things that have happened through the years, and that we can improve upon those things and learn from those lessons to do better, I think, especially within communities of color. I think that in some ways, if we do the traditional route of, meetings or just meeting folks and those sorts of things, we're typically not going to get the sorts of responses that we probably want in terms of, a robust perspective, from, all different sides. And so I'd like to see us learn from those mistakes that we've made or learn from the lessons that we've learned from that and do better. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just add to the commentary. The body of work that we reviewed today and the state that it's in, I think the council members here on the committee have really spoke to it well. And it should be noted that there are several things that had to be in place before we had this cutting edge document that's just going to be this living, powerful tool to improve the physical and social community that we have and serve. We had our Access Minneapolis plan. In some ways, we're one of the communities that created an implementation plan before we had a framing plan, our framing document, and I think we learned a lot by doing. And of course, we got to a point where we need to have a framework, a powerful framework, and our complete streets. It's one of the nice things of having one of the later iterations of a complete streets. It can be really refined by not only our local insights, but also regional and national insights. And I think our document, the final product, reflects that and is very impressive, therefore. The fact that we decided to have an internal planning division, you can be busy doing a lot of work if you're responsible for a complex infrastructure system, but to step back and reorganize your very valuable resources, particularly your personnel resources, to plan and look far ahead, we can't do this type of work without that being in place. And then, of course, you don't want to have too fancy, ambitious plans if you don't have money to pay for it, because that would be disheartening to both the staff and the public. And we committed. We put our money where our hearts are, and now we can move forward. And I think this document takes all that, incorporates it, moves forward, and I think it's, I think Council Vice President Glidden said it well. This is a cutting-edge document. This is something that, I sit on a lot of jurisdictional, multi-jurisdictional transportation boards, and this is kind of talk of the town, so to speak. So congratulations, it's pretty impressive. With that, I will move to receive and file the document update that we had presented today. All in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting name. That carries, and we are adjourned.